Hello everyone, and welcome to one more edition of Beyond the Lane, our weekly League of Legends Pro Talk show. I am your host, Jared Wynn, bringing you an exciting discussion of the first week of the League Championship Series in North America and in Europe, as well as some talk of the LCK over in Korea, where the champions play, of every past World Championship of the last few years. But we'll get to that eventually. We'll start in the big regions as far as we're concerned, America, Europe. And to talk about that with me is the coach of a European team, YamatoCannon. Yamato, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty excited overall. We had a good start of the split, so can't be any better.
Your team's looking good. They're looking pretty in the background, actually, looking very attractive, handsome.
Yes.
Yeah, you'd agree.
Sunglasses during the night, sure. Why not?
Sunglasses, exactly. That's my thought, really. That's what really gave the aura to me. But let's get right into it. Let's delay no further. In America, Yamato, we'll start here. TSM, Team Solo Mid, debuted in the summer split where they went over CLG, the runners-up from MSI. A nice coup for TSM, looking pretty solid at 2-0. Did you like what you saw from the runners-up from the spring split?
I think definitely TSM look like the best team in North America right now. Sure, it's hard to say after just 1 week, but in the games that they played, very, very solid. I like the addition of Biofrost. He definitely showed that in lane he can play multiple champions, and I think it's perfect with Doublelift because I feel like Doublelift only has one gear. I don't think he knows how to play defensive or passive while his team plays around the other side of the map. So I think it's good to add a mechanical support that just has a big champion pool that makes sure you can counter-pick supports and make sure that you can eventually play around the bot lane the entire game. And in general, like the overall aggression that TSM shows throughout the game, they don't hesitate as much. And it feels like there's not too many cooks in the kitchen now because there's a clear leadership and a clear goal in game, which was lacking the previous split, especially like during the regular split. In the playoffs, it looked better and better, but I feel like the addition of just some raw mechanics was perfect because they have leadership in Bjergsen and Svenskeren.
Would you call Biofrost an upgrade over Yellowstar?
In this case, yes. Yellowstar is a legend. He has accomplished a lot, and I feel like they didn't really need the leadership Yellowstar provides to a team. I think mechanically Yellowstar is definitely subpar, but he compensates that with good decisions and leadership. And I think in this case, Biofrost has great mechanics. He showed it multiple of times on Karma, on Bard as well. And I think it's just raw mechanics is what TSM needed in the end.
We mentioned CounterLogic Gaming losing to TSM in the first week, in the first match actually of the NA split. They came off their great performance at MSI, went 0-2 in America. Is it just like a temporary downfall after they had the great performance over at MSI? Is it a problem you see with the team? What caused them to go 0-2, and should fans of CLG be concerned, do you think?
I don't think... I think it's too soon to be concerned. It's I feel like they were really out of shape, did a lot of individual mistakes. The general idea of how they played the game was still there. I think the games that they lost were still competitive to some degree, but I feel like there was a lot of individual misplays. I felt like their draft was out of date as well. I think a great example is the fact that they gave away Lucian twice, and Lucian obviously in 6.10 is completely bonkers, broken. You should, if you give up Lucian, you should do some kind of a trade, but there was no trade in place, no OPs being traded like Echo or, for example, a jungle pick. And I felt like, their individual plays were lacking. And I feel like, the general trend for this week for COG was that they're just out of shape. And I think taking a break, I'm just running on assumptions, taking a break after MSI is completely fine, but I'm pretty sure COG will find footing again and gain ground as they go further in the split.
Would you say, Yamato, it's better to take a vacation after MSI than before it?
Well, of course, I think after MSI, second place at MSI, that's very deserving of a vacation indeed.
Yeah, even more so deserving than first place in the EU Spring Split before MSI. Just throwing it out there. Not if maybe there's some European teams or coaches listening to me and kind of wondering about when to take a vacation in the future. Just keep it in mind. With the 2-0 teams in America, though, we'll get on to another couple of them, I should say. Immortals going 2-0. In spite of a rough start against C9, they came back and got that series in hand. They went 2-0. Huni, though, kind of questionable with his top lane picks, not really respecting the tank option in the top lane. Still, he's holding firm to his damage-dealing roots. Do you think this is a problem long-term for Huni and for Immortals as a team, with him playing in the top lane and being so unwilling to be flexible, it seems?
I think the fact that they managed to pull it off on a patch which is very favored for the tanks, like Maokai and Echo. Sure, he played a game of Echo, but the fact that they managed to make it work on a patch which tanks are lesser on is amazing to me, because after Maokai has been nerfed, Echo has been nerfed, suddenly these Riven picks and all of these other picks, like the carry, Aurelia, etc., with the Trinity Force buff, these are going to show up. And I think that is just perfect for Huni. The fact that they managed to pull it off on a patch where Maokai is superior, Echo is superior, I think is very, very impressive.
Do you think it's a long-term problem, though? Because we've seen Huni, but in the past, struggle against the best top laners in the world. At the World Championship, for example, he ran into a bit of a wall in the semifinals there when he was playing for Fnatic. Is it an issue for Huni if he cannot adjust to playing tanks, if he refuses to play tanks?
Oh, definitely. I think if they, for example, went to MSI and he refused to play Maokai, then Immortals would have had a very bad time. I think it's very important to adjust to every patch. I think Immortals' run in the playoffs showed that they didn't adjust, and hopefully they learned from their playoff run that you have to play tanks when they are in meta, because it's kind of depressing to play against an OP Papi or a Maokai and you bring out something like a Yasuo or whatever. It just doesn't work at all.
Now, we say that, but we've seen already Huni go against the meta. Do you think he will in time adjust, and he will in the playoffs perhaps for this split, if Immortals make the playoffs, of course, he will go to the tank meta if necessary, or do you think he's just a very stubborn player and this is just who he is? He's going to stick with this?
I have the feeling, based off of history alone, like even in Fnatic, that he's going to be very, very stubborn. Let's just pray for Huni's sake that the meta favors him and we get to see the Huni we love to see, the one that plays carries, the one that always takes an advantage and pushes this advantage to the max, because Huni, regardless of his stubbornness, still one of the best top laners that we've ever seen in the LCS.
Now, speaking as a coach, if you have a player like Huni, a superstar player, world-class talent, clearly a great player on the world stage, but stubborn and not wanting to commit to a meta that doesn't suit he thinks, his personal skills, how do you handle that? Do you try to facilitate his personal skills? Do you try to get him to come over to the dark side of actually picking a tank champion?
Well, I would obviously try to convert him to the dark side, as you called it. Sure,
right.
It is the dark side, because who likes playing against tanks and who likes playing tanks? But to be honest, I don't know Huni personally. To me, coaching is very unique, and every player has this uniqueness about them, their personality. So I don't know exactly the approach I would do with Huni, because I don't know him per se, but I would definitely try to push him towards the Maokai direction if it was needed, because obviously it loses you games if you don't in some patches.
Maybe just go the Riot direction and just find him. Just take money out of his pocket. That'll work, I think.
Just hit him where it hurts,
Yes.
right on the wallet.
Suspend him, fine him, ban him. Why not? 1 year, can't do anything. Enough about that, though. Apex and Envious also going 2-0, or just Team Envy, I think in the LCS is what they're calling themselves. Envy and Apex going 2-0. Which of these two teams do you think is a bigger threat down the stretch in the split?
I feel like the thing was Envious, or Envy, whatever you want to call them, Envy, I think they've shown a lot of prowess. I think their mechanical ceiling is very, very high. I think they showed great map play, and map play together with mechanics was going to take you a long, long way. On the other hand, Apex, I feel like in this first week, for some reason, I feel like they've reached their ceiling already. Because I look at the roster and I see players like Apollo, Xpecial, and Keen, and I don't think that they have a high ceiling. I think their strength is the draft, definitely, and their overall map play, but usually the teams that are the best have the combination of the two. I think Envious, for now, are slightly worse than Apex, but I think in the long run, I think definitely their mechanics, mixed with some experience together, mixed with some meshing together, I think they're going to be the stronger team in the long run.
Now over to the less fortunate teams who went 0-2. We mentioned CLG already. Team Liquid also 0-2, and they had a substitute come in. We had Dardoch step in the jungle for them. For Moon, two different looks for this team. Do you prefer Moon or Dardoch in the jungle for the team? Do you think one makes a difference over the other right now for Team Liquid?
I think Dardoch is by far like 100 times better than Moon. I think Moon over at Energy was the obvious weakness of that team. Very inconsistent, gets strong jungle picks and never seemed to do anything with them. I remember this game specifically where I think they played against COG and the game went on for like 44 minutes and he had, I think, one stack on Kindred passive, which is completely awful. I think with that in mind, Dardoch is clearly the better player. The one game Dardoch played, there was a shining light, all of a sudden they get some kills in the early game because, without Dardoch, it just looked completely lackluster. I think the pick and ban was completely garbage. They give away picks like Ryze and Echo with no trade in mind. And I think their overall play was like a cute cat just laying down that wants to get like a nice rub on the stomach or something. It was just fell over, it was just nothing. It was completely a disaster in my opinion. And I think they have a lot of things to work on because there was just nothing. It's just zero. And with that in mind, the first step has to be the draft. Don't give away things like Ryze and Echo for free because these champions win games almost single-handedly in 6.10.
Yeah, if you describe a team's play as being like a cute kitten, that's usually not a good thing in the LCS, where we need big dogs to play, not cute kittens. We need to get our proper animals here. You mentioned a poor draft phase for Liquid. You also mentioned poor drafting by CLG. Did you see a difference in America? We'll start here with the best of 3 style in terms of the drafts and how teams are doing the draft phase.
Well, I don't think there was too much of a difference with the top teams. I feel like clearly you had 3 champions that were on top, 4 champions, Nidalee, Kindred, Ryze, and Echo. These are like the top champions, Sig Evolution. Then we have 5. I think these are the ones you need to look out for in the trades in 6.10. Things obviously have changed a lot for 6.11, but if you don't trade for these champions, I think you're going to be in a very, very poor position. And I think the teams that showed strength in the first week definitely had high priority on these champions, and I think that is something we've seen across all regions, regardless of best of 2 or best of 3.
Another team that started off 0-2 was Energy, with a promising roster as well. We had, of course, Santorin, Quas, GBM, OQ. Not bad. I didn't mention Kiwi Kid. He's also on the team. Kiwi Kid's on the team. Not a bad lineup, it would seem, but it didn't quite come together for them. Do you think they need more time to gel, or is the team showing some signs of splinter that you don't think will be fixed in time?
I feel like definitely they seemed rather clueless. Kind of reminded me of Team Liquid in a way. They just seemed very, very clueless on the map. Nothing happened. They were also just waiting for the enemy team to do something. I felt like one of the games that I watched, I don't remember which one it was, but they just gave up everything. Nothing happened, no kills, and all of a sudden the enemy team had like a 5-6k gold lead. Nothing happened at all. They were just giving away objectives. And then finally the enemy team in the second game that they played, they got a lead for free from the enemy team because they screwed up. I think it was against Envy, to be honest. And they didn't do anything with the lead. So it feels like it's very, very lackluster. No map play at all, no cohesion. I feel like, some people like to call Energy like some superstar roster, but to be honest, Kos hasn't played competitive for a long time. So I think the opinion of him should be, you should be kind of skeptical because you can't expect him to come in with the same level that he used to have. And also looking at Santorin and Kiwi Kid, I think these are 2 players that have been very subpar and lackluster on the previous teams. So in general, I'm excited about OQ and GBM, of course the Koreans, but the rest, I'm not too sold on them just yet. So I don't think we're going to see an Energy upswing just yet.
We'll see if they're able to get into shape as the season goes along. Now we have a couple of clips, I think, from the North American start to the season, starting with a Bard highlight that does not feature Afromu. That's right. It's from TSM versus Team Liquid, I believe, as Liquid going for a tower dive here. Take it away.
So this, like Team Liquid, they try to go for the dive, but I think Bifrost shows clearly that his mechanics are in place. The Bard ultimate was absolutely beautiful. I also love the Hans's timing on the never move. I think this kind of highlights the aggression that I talked about. TSM like to play around their bot lane. Double Lift likes all this attention. He likes to play these aggressive champions. We also talked about the Lucian that went through the pick and ban a lot for TSM, which is very, very dangerous. I think this kind of highlights the new strengths of TSM, which is then Bifrost on his mechanical play, and I don't think anything else but a triple Bard ult says mechanical play. It just screams mechanical play.
This is a very difficult question for you to answer. That's why I ask you. the expert that you are. For TSM, having a mechanical emphasis with Double Lift and Biofrost in the bottom lane, is that a good long-term option if their goal is to have like a good showing at Worlds, for example? Can they place at a tournament like Worlds with that sort of emphasis in the team?
Well, to be honest, a lot of these, I think it kind of works with the Huni example as well. You have this one-dimensional play. Personally, I think the players that can play both passively and aggressively at the right times are the best players because they're well-rounded, and usually the pick and ban phase can go both ways. If you want to have an optimal pick and ban phase, you should expect yourself to go both ways. Because, for example, let's say you play around top lane like the Huni, and you put yourself in a situation where the enemy last pick stop and they find the right counter picks, all of a sudden your comfort is out of place. And with that in mind, you need to be able to play both ways. You need to be able to play around bot lane. You need to be able to play around top side and also around mid. Versatility is key on the highest level. But when it comes down to, regional play, usually one set strategy works because, it's just cookie cutter every week.
Our next clip comes from, I believe, Cloud9 versus Immortals, and we go from Bard to Azir, showing off his skills. We'll see if we can get that running. Here it is. Take it away.
So the crazy part about me for Cloud9 was, I felt like they showed some cohesion. They finally showed that they can play without high, to some degree at least. Sure, they went 0-2, but the weirdest part for me about C9 was their inconsistency in individual play. Sometimes you saw crazy plays like this one where Jensen just quarter kills and completely slaughters the enemy team. And then sometimes you saw him gliding into 5 people and dying and throwing away a big advantage. And this was the general trend for a lot of their players. They just had inconsistencies in their individual play. I'm very, very happy that they at least showed that they can play the map game without high. I think that's very, very positive, and that's something everyone should look out for if they are a C9 fan. Very positive. I think the main thing that I want to highlight with C9 though is the fact that Impact, I think he's a beast, played very good even in the games that they lost. And I think it's the greatest addition C9 could ever do.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about C9, but you do think the team looks good as it currently is composed, because there's a lot of questions here, obviously a lot of talent, but the high factor has been so important for them in the past. You think that they can get over that?
I hope so, because, whenever people, or I heard the story about C9 where you have this player that micromanages everyone, I think the thought of that is crazy. I think it worked in the past, but we've reached the point where players are so good individually in terms of decision-making and mechanics that you can't have one person have his brain activated for 5 people. You need to have 5 players that know how to take decisions. It has to be very quick and efficient. For example, I have, shot calling should be like this, in my opinion. You say, we need to pressure the bottom tower. All of a sudden, it should click something in everyone's mind in a team that they should do something specific. For example, the bot lane should start pushing, top lane should look for a TP bottom, etc. The jungle should move towards bottom side. I think this is the proper playing. And thinking back at what High used to do, micromanaging players like balls, I think is just too outdated. So I'm happy C9 are taking steps towards the right direction, because focusing on individual decision making is very important at this point in time in the game, because the competition is just getting harder and harder.
Well, as C9 steps in the right direction, we step over to Europe, your backyard, and we start with the reigning champions, G2 and 8, who are now G2 and 0. A much better look for them, I should say, although on a different stage, but still a better look for them. What changed for G2 going from G2 and 8 to G2 and 0?
Well, to be honest, I'm assuming they didn't take vacation.
Right.
That is the first thing that needs to be mentioned. They didn't take a vacation before the split started, because we did scrim them. And with that in mind, they basically took the 2 players that put the team in the finals, like Origin, their opponent. They just snapped the 2 players that put them there. Okay, just take everything from the competition. Perfect. Mithy and Nils showed once again why they are considered the best bot lane in Europe. I think people ask a lot of questions if this team will mesh together, but to be honest, I feel like they all, at this point in time, you have 5 players that have shown dominance with, maybe I should say 4 players, because I think Kikis is an exception, but Perks, Rookie of the Split, Trick, MVP of the Split, and then you have the best bot lane in Europe. Of course, 4 players that play at the highest level in their role in the respective region is going to be just working together just fine. Because if you play at the highest level, there is this type of way that you have to play to kind of compete in a game. You just understand the basics at this level, and everything, when they just get put together, they have played at the highest level. They understand the highest level, and they all are in it for the same thing. They are winners.
I was going to ask you, well, winners as long as they're not in MSI. I was going to ask you if you had a weakness for this team, and it sounds like you already have hinted at what the weakness might be for them.
Well, I think for sure the weakness is Kikis. I think with the nerfs coming in 6.11, he's going to be put out of his comfort zone, which are these potatoes like Poppy and Maokai and Trundle and whatchamacallit, all these boring tanks. I think it will be interesting to see him playing those carries against, because I remember in the previous regular split when he played, for example, Fiora, it was very lackluster. And I think Kikis is going to be a weakness. But then again, I say weakness very, very lightly, because the other players have so much strength that it kind of covers it up. I think coming in, playing against G2, you just need to make sure to do as little mistakes as possible, because, even G2 make mistakes. We saw it even in the games that they won. And it's just a competition of who makes the least mistakes. So I think you need to bring your A game 100% and hope G2 kind of slip up, because at this point in time, they look the strongest.
Now, while the big name G2 got off to a great start, another big name, Origin, got off to a terrible start. In fact, the worst start possible over in Europe, going 0-4 in their 4 games. Origin, what went wrong for this team? It would seem they have talent, so why couldn't they put it to good use?
Oh, it's like the last time we brought up Origin on the show, it was like so strong personalities. You have amazing, Soas, Forgiven, how will this go? And I think for a team like this to have a poor start is very, very dangerous. And, they went up against G2. I feel like that loss hit them hard. I think G2 was clearly the better team, but Origin still showed that they are capable to some degree. It wasn't a complete stomp, at least in the second game. And seeing them against UOL, it was kind of depressing. It was kind of sad, because UOL against Schalke, they got completely smashed. So I expected, Origin to be able to bounce back, but I felt like there is something emotionally wrong with the team on stage. It didn't recognize them at all compared to how they were the previous day.
Right. Now, Fnatic got off to a decent start, a pretty solid start, actually. What did you think of Yellowstar making his big return to the black and gold?
I think, the beauty of Yellowstar and Fnatic is Daylor understands the strengths of Yellowstar. Yellowstar got put on Braum 3 times, and he played a game of Janna. I think that game Braum was banned. Unlucky Yellowstar would have probably went for that 4-game Braum. But then again, I think Fnatic were the ones that banned Braum, because Hustling Beast doesn't play a lot of champions either. So with that in mind, I feel like Daylor understands Yellowstar's strengths, and in my opinion, Yellowstar's strength is his leadership. It's very clear that Yellowstar has this aura around him where his teammates, like on Fnatic, play better. It feels like they can finally focus on their mechanical play. I also saw in the Spirit interview that he feels kind of like he has this pressure lifted off his shoulders, that he doesn't need to micromanage everything. Reckless doesn't need to shot call as much. Fib even the same. And I feel like it shows. Their play has vastly improved, and Yellowstar is being put on the champions that are rewarded for decisions. Like, for example, a Braum, where he puts up the shield at the right time. That is like a decision kind of that you take, and it rewards you greatly. He doesn't. He's not that good on these mechanical champions, and I think that is the correct approach. Yellowstar, perfect on things like Braum. Yellowstar, I was about to say, Braum, and Janna as well, rewarded for decisions, and I think that's perfect for Yellowstar. Perfect fit for Fnatic.
I see some parallels here between Yellowstar and Fnatic and Cloud9 and High, where we talk about a player who's not perhaps the most mechanically gifted these days, but is a very good decision maker, helps manage the team very well, makes the other players feel more at ease. We talk about how it's good for High perhaps to step away so Cloud9 can grow more individually, get better together as a team. Is Fnatic better off if Yellowstar can exit stage left and they can become better as players in a team together, or is their ceiling with Yellowstar in the lineup?
I think, like in this particular case, I feel like it's very important, because Reckless, Fabiven, and Spirit to me are mechanically very, very good. It can be at the top in the region. And I think if they have a player that can just lead the game and kind of lead how the game is supposed to go, I think it's perfect for them. Because if they can just focus on their mechanical play, I think they can show that they can be one of the best in their region at their respective role.
So for Fnatic, you think the hit to mechanical ability in the bottom lane is worthwhile for the gain of the tactical management that Yellowstar brings?
Yeah, for sure. I think the one weakness you might see in the future with Fnatic is, they are blind picking this Braum every game. And as these new supports come into the picture, there are a lot of counters to Braum, these ranged supports like the Nami, etc. And I think if players and teams start to focus on that bot lane, maybe remove the Kalista, you might see an obvious weakness in Fnatic, because once again, you have this situation where they are playing bot lane and they always have a weaker side in a way if they keep blind picking that Braum.
Now, one of the most hyped teams in all of the LCS, America or Europe, was not even that hyped for their roster, more for the team's new name. Schalke, of course, the football club coming to League of Legends. What did you think of Schalke with their mixed debut?
Well, I think where we should start is the roster change. I think Aika last split in Europe was the worst player out of all of the 50 players that were in the LCS.
Wow.
And with that in mind, Fox is definitely a step up. I think his lane phase is very, very good, very, very dangerous on a few champions. I think his one weakness is his champion pool. He has showed up on Azir big time, and when he finally lashes onto a champion, he masters it and plays it all split. And I feel like finally Schalke have a mid lane to play around, and it shows. Gilius is stepping up and the rest of the team is stepping up. I think even though the mid lane change is very important, I think Schalke is finally starting to look like the team they are in scrims. Because, I feel like Schalke kind of remind me of the situation I'm in, In the start, you had like 5 or 4 mechanical players in their case that were very gifted mechanically, but, they just needed to get the basics down, because a lot of the losses we had and they had were because of basic mistakes. A lane swap happened, all of a sudden that you send the person to the wrong lane, you lost because the enemy top lane got 50 CS and yours just has 8 CS. Unlucky, good luck laning with a 3-level disadvantage, and the game is lost. And with that in mind, with these mistakes ironed out and the basics down, Schalke looks very, very strong.
Sounds good. Now, I won't ask you to reveal any deep, dark secrets about your own team here, but your team also played their first week of the European LCS, going 1-1, or I guess having a draw in each game, kind of difficult to get there. But yeah, going 2-2, if you prefer, or just 2-0. How are we going to say that? They had draws. Your team drew both opponents, Rocat and Vitality. What did you think of your own team's play?
I was very, very happy. I think, against Vitality, I see them as one of the better teams in Europe for sure. A lot of people expected us to just flat out lose, but I feel like we've finally showed what we're capable of. I think my general idea of the team is to just make sure I have 5 mechanical players who I can teach the game somehow, the basics and how you should play the map in general. And finally, the players that I kept are a part of the system that I have built up, the kind of how we review scrims and how we kind of review things, and everything is super efficient for us at this point. I can say something very simple and I don't need to explain it at this point because everything just clicks. So with that in mind, all of my players at this point, they think by themselves in game. They are very, very calm, and with the experience they gained from the previous split, I think we can just keep going up, because I think the start was very, very good. The matchup against Rocat, on the other hand, I felt like we were the better team. The second game that we played against them, which we lost, was due to some teamfight mistakes. I felt like clearly in the early game and the mid game, the part that is usually the hard part of the game, we were superior, but we just took a bad fight in a choke point and kind of walked into a Swain. And usually team fights like this, 30 minutes and 25 minutes into the game, settle the game. And that's fine, because we are happy with the fact that we know that we are capable and we know that we are strong.
How about Swain, by the way? Do you like Swain in the meta now? You like him as a champion coming through?
Oh, it's like mid lane. The mid lane meta is very. It's very exciting because I feel like it's going to go around in a circle all the time. I don't think it's going to be similar at all. Like for example, 6.11, sure, Swain got nerfed, but I think if he didn't get nerfed, people would finally find the counters for it. Because I think a good point is SKT against KT Rolster. They played, for example, Anivia into the Vladimir and the Swain. All of a sudden, people realize, holy moly, people used to play Anivia into these champions 3 years ago, and it works very well. And I think with that in mind, it's going to go around in a circle. People are going to start playing Anivia and the counter to Swain and Vladimir. People are going to realize, holy moly, people only play these champs. We need to find the counters to these champs. And it's going to go around in a circle, and it's going to keep going and going. And I love it, because for the first time, I feel like the mid lane champion pool is very dynamic. The support champion pool is very dynamic. And hopefully, with the nerfs to top lane of Echo and Maokai, the top lane pool will also be very dynamic. So I feel like the pick and ban phase, thinking about Swain in general, I think the pick and ban phase is going to be very interesting. And to answer your question about Swain, he's an interesting champ. I think in the case of Vladimir Swain, they kind of fill the same kind of area. There's these kind of mages that just heal up a shit ton and are just annoying in general. I think Swain definitely is a stronger one. I think Vladimir is a better blind pick, but Swain does very good into Vladimir. So I think that is where the mismatch happens. But Swain in general, just to answer your question, simply and flat, I think there are clear counters, and I think he's going to fall out of meta eventually, especially with the nerf in 6.11.
We'll see. The nerf does tend to help that to happen, to fall out of the meta a little bit. You have G2 next week. I assume against G2, your strategy is just to go 5-man top and straight to Nexus?
Yeah. Just kick his, just try to kick him in the nuts and just keep him down on the ground, just keep kicking. That is indeed
aggressive
our strategy.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Like,
don't tell him.
Like outside of the game, or like like in the game and figuratively?
Yeah, outside of the game, of course.
Okay, like before the game, just backstage, you find him, just kick him in the nuts, and
just don't tell anyone.
That's okay. Hey, your secret's safe with me and anyone else watching this show. Now we have the new best of series. I talked briefly about this in terms of drafts. How did you feel though? Because you actually got to experience the best of series in Europe, and you saw the best of 3 series over in America. How did you feel about the introduction of series play to the LCS?
I love the fact that you can play more games. It was kind of sad sometimes to lose a game and all of a sudden you just need to go home and it just feels like you didn't get anything out of the day. I think more games is always better for the players. They gain more experience, they learn more, because sure you could, they're playing the same game in scrims as they do on stage, but it is quite different. You get voice comms and it is different. It's kind of hard to pinpoint why. Sure, there's a stage, there's people looking at you, there's a ping difference. I guess those are the differences. But in the end, I think a higher volume of games is only beneficial for a region as a whole. And, in terms of adaptation, luckily we have one blue side, one red side. You have 2 strategies coming in from both sides. So in terms of pick and ban, there isn't too much adaptation. Maybe sometime in the future when someone thinks of like a new pick, or like a specific player has a specific pick that all of a sudden is good and you can't find an answer. I think in those cases, adaptation will be very important, but simply because it's one blue side, one red side, there is not a lot of room for adaptation just yet.
It does seem like it'd be different too, rather than just going home and talking about the loss or the win, you go backstage, you discuss, and you play again. It's a different dynamic for you?
Well, it feels, it kind of reminded me of like a best of 5 setting where you just talk in between the game, but, it kind of reminds me of how I do scrims as well. Usually, I just, whenever we play a game, right after the game, when it's fresh and in the players' minds, we go through their mindset in specific situations and figure out the best way of playing specific situations. I usually write down points and we go through the game. In a sense, it's very similar on stage, but of course we have less time and I need to be more concise. Usually I just mention the things that are easily solvable, like for example, we need to pressure Baron in this way and you need to do this in this moment. For example, you pressure the wrong side of the map. very simple points that the players can pick up very, very fast because, it's always been a part of my system. So in terms of how confident and comfortable I am and my team is with the system, I think it fits perfect for us.
Would you prefer best of 3 or best of 2?
Well, to be honest, if you ask me, would you prefer best of 11, I would say that because,
Right.
higher volume of games is better for me. I think the more games you play, the more obvious it is who is the better team. I think it is very important to play a high volume of games because, consistency is important, but sometimes you lose a game because you had 3 cloud drakes that spawned. Sometimes you lose a game because you lost a 50-50 smite battle. Sometimes you lose a game because your keyboard was weird and you maybe saw a spider and you pressed the flash button and jumped into the enemy team. Sometimes things happen.
That happens.
Random things happen. And with that in mind, a higher volume of games shows truly who the better team is, but I don't think best of 11 is realistic. So best of 3 sounds good enough for me.
I have to remember the spider excuse for next time I miss a flash over a wall. It's like, hey, a spider. Sorry, I couldn't do anything about it. Spider attacked me on my keyboard.
Happens.
Yeah, it just happens. Spider attacks. Jacob said so. Getting to a couple highlights now from the EU LCS. We have, I think, H2K and Rocat with a mid-lane battle here.
So it's like, when I watched this replay, the first thing that came to my mind was, Caitlyn is dead. Maybe you should give up this tower because it's not the best idea without your AD carry to try to kill a Swain because, Swain is a champion that needs to be focused down with heavy DPS. Sure, Ryze is an OP champion and does a lot of damage, but it just isn't enough if your AD carry is gone. Sure, Caitlyn joins in the fight later on, but everyone is dead already. I think they should have given up the tower and accepted the fact that, just count your losses. There's no point in adding a mistake to your mistake because this tower should be donezo.
As a coach, how do you help a team to determine that magic point where they give up the tower as opposed to defending it? Because it seems like a difficult thing. It obviously is in dynamic queue. Now I was going to say solo queue. It's difficult in anyone's pickup games. How do you do that as a professional team?
Well, you play such a high volume of games. I think every single one of my players have more than 10,000 games on their shoulders. And, at this point in time, there is some math involved, like natural math in your head that goes on. You just count distance and champions and the interaction between champions and like the potential of engage. There are a lot of variables involved, but simply because you've played such a high volume of games, you can kind of just see it. It might sound very silly, but, if you've played, if we have a total of 70,000 games together in this house alone, then, you just see these things. And sometimes it's harder to make a judgment call. Sometimes it's easier. In this case, I think it was a harder situation because Braum wasn't in a good position and Ryze was definitely also in a good position because the Braum shield did a lot of work. And, in theory, this was very, very close. Caitlyn was about to spawn and she has home guard. I think this was a close call, but in some scenarios it's very, very, it's easier to tell. In this case, I can give HK some slack.
We have another mid lane fight here to discuss. That's Origin versus G2 and O. No longer G2 and 8, G2 and O.
Well, this one is quite interesting. I think OG's team composition is what shocked me the most, where they brought out the Corki, they have this poke composition, and the moment they saw the Fizz in the pick and ban phase, I think they knew they screwed up because they banned the champions they thought were good against Varus. I think they removed LeBlanc and also Zed. They forgot that there's another assassin in mid lane in the pool, and I think Fizz's strength obviously shows here. He comes in with the TP, the fish latches on, and a composition that wants to poke and sit back is going to get slaughtered by a composition that just wants to walk in and sit on your face.
We've all been there, I think. We've all been there. By the way, I hate Fizz. Can I just tell you that? Just between you and I. Again, a secret between you and I don't like Fizz at all. I really don't.
You're really going to enjoy 6.11, man.
Yeah.
With Echo gone and Maokai gone, everyone's going to play this fish. So
looking forward to it. I want to see
Good
Huni's
luck.
Fizz. I want to see that. That's what I want to see more than anything else. Over to Korea now. Speaking of a Korean player, we're going to briefly touch on the LCK. Very briefly, SK Telecom T1, they had a rough first slate of games. KT Rolster, Rocks Tigers, that's pretty tough. And here they are, undefeated, SKT. This team rolling right from the MSI victory into going 2-0 against two great teams in the LCK. They seem to be carrying that momentum over very well.
I feel like, when I think of LCK, I don't feel like the draft. It feels the drafts haven't changed too much. People are still playing the same things, very similar to the things people played over at MSI and SKT were the masters of that. And I feel like SKT just continued doing the same thing, Azir every game almost, and I feel like they just kept practicing the same way. I think the big issue for LCK is the fact that they are very unwilling to think outside of the box. It feels like they're trying to compete against SKT at their own game with picking Victor and kind of picking these matchups that are 50-50 and instead of thinking outside of the box. Azir has some counter matchups, throw a Zed in there, maybe throw a Varus in there, maybe throw a Xerath in there. Dare to think outside the box because, SKT, the team that has the highest level of consistency that I've ever seen in League of Legends, you don't want to compete against them at their own game. Try to think outside the box, think of some counter picks of these specific champions that SKT like to pick every game because they pick the same all the time. Sure, you can try to ban them out, but I think SKT is a team that has accounted for the possibility of these bans coming in. So I think it's more about trying to figuring out the correct picks against these champions. Like the Azir, there are counter picks, very obvious counter picks, and try to work it from there. Don't try to compete against them at their own game, because you're going to have a bad time.
Right, we know if you play a certain way, SKT is beatable. They struggled in the spring split. They, of course, lost 4 games in a row, as crazy as it seems, at MSI, in spite of winning the entire event and then going 2-0 against KT and Rox Tigers. So they're beatable, just not by KT and Rox Tigers in this instance. Now, the other team, there's 2 teams who are 6-0 in terms of games played. SKT and Samsung Galaxy. Is Samsung a potential long-term threat? I believe they got off to a good start last split as well and then kind of tailed off. Is Samsung a legitimate threat over in Korea, do you think?
It is like, I feel afraid to just say it right off the bat because, they played against a very weak Rox Tigers. I think they were the losers more than Samsung were the winners, but definitely Samsung were a good team. I think they showed that they are a good team, but I fear the same thing that you just exactly said. They had a good start last split. I feel afraid to just say that things are going to go great once again, because history has a tendency to repeat itself.
Well, we'll see. I think it will here. SKT repeated their own success. We'll maybe see Samsung repeat their own failures. We'll find out in due time. Just 1 week of league play across the world, and we've already have all these good storylines, these juicy things to sink our teeth into. We'll now sink our teeth into the meta, the overall game. The dragons, will start there. The new dragons, I should say, the Drakes and the Elder Dragon, whatever you want to call them, I don't know. There seems to be a definitive listing of strength in terms of dragons or drakes. The Mountain, of course, very strong. The Infernal or Fire or Flame dragon, the red one, pretty strong. Some of the others, between the Air and Water, not really worth even paying attention to. It's kind of like Rift Herald, just kind of there, if you have time for it. How does it change the way the game plays when you have certain drakes or dragons, draconic monsters that are really powerful and some that are not really worth putting your lane around?
I feel like, in those games that tend to be slower, where teams are even with gold, you kind of hope that Infernal Drake spawn, because usually team fights happen there. I think Mountain Drake, to some degree, is powerful, but I think Mountain Drake is only good if you're in a winning position, so you don't want to kind of take massive risk for it. But Infernal Drake is where the party is at. If there's a party with Infernal Drake on it, you want to be there. You want to get a VIP ticket, and you want to be there early. You want to have wards all over the place. You want to have that Infernal Drake. So with games that tend to be more even, a slower early game, Infernal Drakes is where it's at. And with the rest of the Drakes, you mentioned Cloud Drake and the Ocean Drake, very, very boring. Like Ocean Drake to me is the second best Drake because it actually gives you some kind of combat stats.
Okay.
Mountain Drake to me is good if you're in a winning position, but to be honest, if you're in a winning position already, I don't think you need that extra boost. Sure, it's fancy to kill Baron 10% faster, but I think people kind of overestimate what it actually does. So let's say you kill Baron in 15 seconds, and with your team composition, you remove 10% off of that with your true damage. Sure, you can, let's say it's 20% because it's true damage. It's not that much, it's 3 seconds. Sure, it matters in some scenarios, but it's once again only good if you're in a winning position. So I'm not too sold on the fact that Mounted Drake is the second best Drake, but I'm not going to say that it's bad, because it is good.
Now, we spoke previously about the Dragon changes when they first came down the pipe, and we talked about how there might not be a big Elder Dragon impact because the games are ending so quickly. We have seen some Elder Dragon play. What have you seen from a 1 week of professional play of the Elder Dragon interaction in the game versus the Baron, or just by itself?
Well, like the interesting interaction, like I don't remember which game, but I've seen some trading happening. And the interesting interaction for me is the fact that the Elder Dragon fire thing that you got going on with the 2 damage is perfect for killing Baron creeps. But the one thing that Baron has got going for it is the fact that it lasts for 3 minutes, while the Elder Dragon lasts for 2 minutes. So that is a very interesting interaction where the Baron team needs to kind of keep it cool for 2 minutes and then kind of push their advantage for 1 minute. But in general, I love the fact that there's 2 big objectives later on in the game. I think there was a lot of scenarios where teams could stall out the Baron and just sit at their inhibitor tower and play Anivia and Caitlyn and whatever, just stall out the game forever. I don't think that's possible with 2 objectives on the map, because if a team has both Baron and Elder Dragon because you sat in your own base, you're going to lose for sure. So I'm happy there's 2 big objectives, because games tend to not be longer than 35 minutes or whenever the Elder Dragon spawns, because that's where like the big roll happens.
That's where the party is, actually, the Elder Dragon. That's the big party. That's the party after the party. The after party, I could say. Yeah. The party after the party is the after party.
Yeah.
Now, the jungle timers have also had some effect here, a little more of a complex issue. How have you seen, as a coach and as a student of the game, if you will, have you seen the jungle timers affect the way games have flowed?
So when you say jungle timers, you mean like the hourglasses that are on top of buffs? Well, to be honest, I think in some cases it matters. When you are in a losing position, it matters. But to be honest, if you're in a losing position and you don't have control of the enemy buffs, then usually you can't contest them anyway. So in theory, it doesn't have much of an impact. It makes things easier in a very, very small way. But usually most junglers that I see and interact with, and Trashy, for example, they have this kind of programmed in their head already. So it doesn't really make a difference. They keep track of the enemy jungler, their jungle path, and you can have like a natural feeling for it already. So I don't think these small hourglasses make a difference in competitive play.
Now, we talked about Swain coming in and Vladimir coming in to some extent. We've seen in the support role, we've seen Karma step in and be a popular pick. We've also seen some of the Plant Princess, Zyra, come in and be a pick. What do you think about the shift in the bottom lane, where we've had a little bit less Alistar and a little bit more Karma, Zyra, Soraka?
Well, to be honest, I like it. I like it a lot, because, it was so boring to see Alistar every game, because this champion was just too good at too many things. He can... I mentioned earlier that versatility is important, and Alistar is really good at, with aggression, is very, very good at defensive play as well. He can easily engage and turret dive with his ultimate, and he can also play defensive, take a lot of poke, heal up, and it's very hard to also dive on Alistar. So his versatility was just too good. He has received a lot of nerfs on the heal, on the ultimate, so I think Alistar is definitely weaker, and it is very obvious when the counter picks show up. Zyra, Karma, and Soraka, for example, Janna as well, are hard counters to Alistar in lane. And with that in mind, lane phase is so important, because it's all about that pressure game. So I think it's very healthy that Alistar has gotten these changes, very healthy that we start to see a lot of supports, because the draft just becomes more and more interesting. You have so many different options. One thing, the next thing on the list, I hope, is that Braum gets nerfed, because he still receives a lot of play. But that is mostly because Braum is just too good into every AD carry that is relevant. He just blocks most of the abilities. It's a shield. It just blocks all the projectiles. Every AD carry shoots projectiles, so the interaction is just a bit too strong there. So I'm hoping Braum is the next one to get nerfed, because I think he is at the same level of Alistar. Braum still sees a lot of play, even though he has a really bad matchup into, for example, the Janna or the Thresh, and I hope he's the next one to get a nerf.
I want to look ahead now to week 2. Believe this, all this action we talked about, just 1 week. 1 week of LCS action, that's it, 1 week. 2 weeks coming up. Starting in North America, a quick preview there. Team Solo Mid versus Immortals, a big matchup, obviously. How do you see, in theory, this playing out?
Well, it's very, very hard to say. I think TSM definitely showed a high level of consistency. I'm a man who loves consistency, so I think I'm going to go for TSM for this one, because Immortals, while they won most of the games, I still felt like they botched a couple of dives, they botched a couple of barons. We even saw that in the replay against Cloud9. There were some things that I don't think TSM are going to allow to happen, and I think they're going to punish those mistakes big time. So I think I'm going to give it to TSM on this one, just based off consistency.
What is the percentage chance that Huni picks a tank against Darshan?
I think it's very, very low.
0?
Just
2?
I think I would say 0, just because of the patch. 6.11 brings back a lot of crazy stuff. I don't want to reveal too much, but the carry meta is coming back. That's all I can say, man. Carry meta is coming back.
I look forward to Huni picking Riven all 3 games against TSM. It's going to be a lot of fun. I said Darshan.
Maybe even 2 games.
What am I talking about? Darshan, that would be a different team, actually. If they eventually he'll play Darshan on the top lane. Look forward to that. He does not play for TSM. Over to Europe now. Origin trying to make a comeback in week 2. It's awfully early to say, a team's going to have a do or die games, but it kind of feels like Origin needs to get some results in week 2 after their horrible start. And considering, as you said, their very strong, dynamic, individual personalities, do you think Origin has must-win games as soon as week 2 here?
I don't know. I think this week is going to be the deciding factor. Are they able to bounce back after 2 heavy defeats? I think this week is the decider, because, on paper, they have very strong individual players, but it feels like a loss is very, very heavy for a team like this. And, this is a team with players that have looked down on coaching in general, which pisses me off. And I don't know what Nico brings to the table specifically, because, they've added him. Or does he have like a coach role like in the other big teams, or in my team, for example? That is the question. And I think in these type of scenarios, you need someone to kind of bring the team together. And with Origin, they've looked down on coaching in the past. I am fearful for their future.
Well, I look forward to seeing what Origin does or doesn't do. Implosions can also be fun to watch. Epic implosions and explosions of teams playing. I look forward to seeing...
Watch out for those tweets.
Yeah, watch out for the tweet, indeed. I look forward to seeing Huni play against Hanser, not Darshan. Really look forward to seeing that. Eventually look forward to seeing him play against Darshan, too. And, of course, more than anything else, I look forward to seeing Splice go 2-0 next week.
Hype. Let's go.
We
play against G2, but, easy win. Win.
Against Splice, G0-2, I think, is more appropriate here, right? Yeah.
It's like we're going to win so hard, tilt them off to 2-8,
Yeah, you'll tilt them back to vacation.
The plan, Just, I told you my plan earlier on. Backstage, kickers, watch out.
Yeah, and then 5-man top, straight to Nexus. Yeah, so look at that. Look at this guy. He's going to tear you up. Well, that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the first week of League of Legends Pro Play in the summer split. Hope you enjoy week 2. Back here, same time, same place next Monday to discuss week 2 and to discuss Splice being the new favorites in the EU LCS. I look forward to it. He looks forward to it, and I hope you look forward to it too. See you then next week.